When Keanu Reeves steps onto the brightly lit set of The Real Talk with Daniel Foster, the audience expects another heartfelt and humble conversation. But Daniel isn't here for admiration. He's here for controversy. With a smirk, he shuffles his cue cards, ready to corner Keanu with a loaded question designed to stir outrage. The cameras roll, the tension thickens, and the moment arrives. But what Daniel doesn't realize is that, in just minutes, his carefully planned ambush will backfire spectacularly. Keanu's response won't just silence the studio. It will shatter everything Daniel thought he knew. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another special story for you. Los Angeles buzzed with the usual energy of a city that never slowed down. The sun hung low, casting a golden hue over the skyline as Keanu Reeves walked into his home, rolling up the sleeves of his black shirt. He had just wrapped up a quiet afternoon, an uncommon luxury in his life. But the moment his phone vibrated on the kitchen counter, he sensed something unusual. Picking it up, he noticed the call was from his agent, Mark Henderson. "Mark," Keanu greeted calmly. "Keanu, we need to talk. You just got an invite to appear on The Real Talk with Daniel Foster." Keanu leaned against the counter, rubbing his jaw thoughtfully. Daniel Foster, a talk show host with a reputation for pushing boundaries, cornering guests, and creating viral controversy. "Interesting," Keanu mused. "Interesting? This guy is a vulture," Mark retorted. "You know his style. He sets traps. He gets guests to slip up, then uses it for clicks and headlines. I wouldn't trust this invitation." Keanu let a small smile tug at the corner of his lips. "So, you think I'd slip up?" Mark sighed. "Number. That's not the point. The point is, he wants to exploit you. Twist your words. It's what he does." Keanu considered the warning. He knew Mark had a valid concern. Daniel Foster's interviews were ruthless. He was sharp, articulate, and merciless when he smelled weakness. Celebrities had left his show humiliated, torn apart by public scrutiny after a carefully orchestrated verbal trap. But Keanu wasn't like most celebrities. "I'll do it," Mark groaned audibly through the phone. "You're serious?" Keanu nodded, though Mark couldn't see him. "Yeah." There was a long pause before Mark finally said, "Then at least be careful. Something about this feels off." Keanu appreciated the concern, but he had already made up his mind. What Mark didn't know was that Keanu wasn't just walking into the lion's den. He was the lion. Inside a dimly lit production room, Daniel Foster stood in front of a large screen, reviewing clips from past interviews. He was surrounded by his core team, producers, writers, strategists, all engaged in an intense discussion. "This is it," Daniel said, pressing pause on a video. The image of Keanu Reeves filled the screen. The untouchable Keanu, the internet's favorite man, the perfect target. One of the producers hesitated. "Target?" Daniel smirked. "Come on, let's be real. Every guest has a weak spot. People love Keanu, sure, but that's exactly why we need to challenge him. If we manage to get him to say something controversial, it'll be everywhere." Another team member, a young researcher, scrolled through notes. "But what's his weakness?" Daniel leaned back, crossing his arms. "He plays the humble, kind-hearted guy role. But everyone has contradictions. We dig deep enough, we'll find them." A producer frowned. "What if we don't?" Daniel shrugged. "Then we create them." Silence filled the room. Daniel tapped his fingers against his desk, excitement glinting in his eyes. This isn't just another interview. This is going to be a media storm. No one knew it yet, but he was right, just not in the way he expected. Meanwhile, in Keanu's quiet home, he scrolled through the reactions. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't nervous. He was just waiting. Because what Daniel Foster didn't realize was that this time, he was the one walking into a trap. Daniel Foster thinks he's about to humiliate Keanu, but he doesn't realize he's walking straight into his own downfall. The streets of Los Angeles were alive with their usual chaos. Honking cars, the chatter of pedestrians, and the distant hum of the city's energy. But inside Keanu Reeves's car, there was only silence. As his black vehicle approached the Real Talk studio, Keanu sat in the back seat, calm as ever, watching the city blur past through the tinted windows. His agent Mark sat beside him, fidgeting slightly, far less calm. "We can still turn around." Keanu glanced at him with a slight smirk. "You say that as if I'm walking into a battlefield." Mark scoffed, rubbing his temple. "You might as well be. Daniel Foster doesn't just interview people, Keanu. He attacks. He sets them up, cuts them off, twists their words. And the second you slip, boom, he's got his viral moment." Keanu's smirk didn't fade. "So you don't trust me to handle it?" Mark let out a frustrated sigh. "I trust you, but I don't trust him. He's playing dirty." Keanu leaned back in his seat. "Then let's see how he handles someone who doesn't play his game." The car rolled to a stop in front of the studio entrance. Flashes from paparazzi cameras exploded like lightning as Keanu stepped out. Reporters, desperate for a soundbite, shouted from behind barriers, "Keanu! Any thoughts before the interview? Are you ready for Foster's questions?" Keanu offered only a small smile and continued inside. The Real Talk studio was a well-oiled machine. A maze of bustling staff, earpieces buzzing, producers pacing with clipboards. The air was thick with tension. Backstage, a group of producers huddled near the monitors, whispering among themselves. This could backfire. Daniel's been cocky before, but this is Keanu Reeves. Yeah, and? They all break eventually. Not him. The last producer's voice was quieter, uncertain. Daniel Foster, however, had no such doubt. In his private dressing room, he was smiling into the mirror, adjusting his tie with precise confidence. He turned to his lead producer. "Everything's ready?" "Yes. We've prepared the talking points. The live audience is hyped, and we've already seeded some questionable tweets about Keanu to stir controversy. People will be watching." Daniel nodded, pleased. "Perfect. Now all I have to do is set the trap and let him walk right into it." The Real Talk studio was bathed in cool blue lighting, the stage sleek and modern. 2 chairs sat in the center, one for Daniel, one for Keanu. The live audience murmured with anticipation. The camera operators gave their final adjustments. The director counted down. "Live in 3, 2, 1. The Real Talk intro music played, and the audience erupted in applause as Daniel Foster walked onto the stage, flashing his signature smile. "Welcome, everyone. Tonight we have a very special guest, a Hollywood legend, a man who has starred in some of the biggest films of our time, and who has somehow managed to remain one of the most beloved celebrities on the planet." The audience cheered louder. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Keanu Reeves." Another burst of applause as Keanu strode onto the stage. His movements were effortless, his expression relaxed. He shook Daniel's hand, nodded to the audience, then settled into his seat with the calm of a man who had already won the game before it even began. Daniel, grinning, leaned forward. "Keanu, thank you for being here." Keanu gave a polite nod. "Thanks for having me." Daniel crossed one leg over the other, shifting comfortably into his persona. The charming host, the sharp-witted commentator, the man who always had the last word. "You know, Keanu, you have a bit of a mythical reputation, don't you?" Keanu raised an eyebrow. "Do I?" "Oh, come on. The internet calls you the nicest guy in Hollywood. Every time we hear about you, it's some new act of generosity, donating millions, giving up your seat on the subway, helping strangers." Keanu smiled lightly, but didn't speak yet. Daniel tilted his head, feigning curiosity. "Do you ever get tired of being seen as too good to be true?" The audience chuckled. A few whispers spread through the room. Keanu took a slow breath, then answered simply, "I don't think kindness should ever be exhausting." The audience clapped, murmuring approval. Daniel's smile tightened slightly. He continued, "But let's be honest. No one is that perfect, right? Isn't it possible that Hollywood has built a narrative around you? Something a little exaggerated?" Keanu gave a small shrug. "I've never asked for a narrative. I just try to live in a way that feels right to me." More applause. Daniel's fingers drummed against his chair. It was time to push. "Well, Keanu, we'll get into all of that. But first, let's talk about your career. I mean, John Wick. Huge success. But some people have pointed out that the character's motivations, avenging a dog, seem almost simplistic. Do you ever worry that your roles rely more on nostalgia than actual depth?" A subtle shift occurred in the audience. Keanu remained unbothered. "I think grief is universal. Losing something you love, whether a person or an animal, can break you. And sometimes, stories don't have to be complicated to be meaningful." The audience applauded again. Daniel's smile flickered. This wasn't working. Keanu wasn't defensive, wasn't rattled. But Daniel wasn't done. He adjusted his notes, then looked Keanu directly in the eyes. "All right, let's get into the real conversation." The audience leaned in. "Keanu, you always talk about generosity, about giving back. But some critics say that your donations to hospitals and social programs are just Hollywood's version of performative activism, a way to push an agenda under the guise of charity." Silence blanketed the room. The audience stiffened. The crew behind the cameras exchanged glances. Daniel waited, expecting to see even a flicker of discomfort cross Keanu's face. But instead, Keanu smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a defensive smile, a calm, knowing smile. And then, he simply said, "Kindness has no ideology." The audience broke into applause. Daniel blinked. That wasn't what he expected. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady. Helping others isn't a political act. It's a human one. The idea that generosity needs to be categorized into left or right, liberal or conservative. It's a distraction. The world has enough division. If I can help someone, I will. No strings attached. The applause grew louder. Somewhere backstage, a producer whispered nervously, "This isn't going the way Daniel planned." Daniel licked his lips, trying to regain control. He still had one last card to play. He glanced down at his notes, then back up at Keanu. "Let's take a quick break. Because after this, I have a question I think you'll find difficult to answer." The screen faded to black. The audience murmured. Keanu remained completely still, because he knew Daniel wasn't setting a trap. He was walking into one. The real ambush is about to begin. But it won't be Keanu who's caught off guard. The stage lights dimmed slightly as the Real Talk returned from its commercial break. The tension in the studio was subtle, but unmistakable. Keanu Reeves sat calmly, his posture relaxed but attentive. Across from him, Daniel Foster smiled, adjusting his cuffs as he leaned forward, signaling the start of what he believed would be his most strategic segment yet. The audience waited, some leaning in, sensing the subtle shift in tone. Daniel's next move had been carefully calculated. He had set the stage. Now it was time to go for the real strike. Daniel exhaled, keeping his voice measured. "Keanu, let's talk about something deeper." Keanu raised an eyebrow, waiting. "Your reputation in Hollywood is unique. You're seen as someone who rejects excess, who avoids the spotlight when you can, who chooses humility over indulgence. And yet..." Daniel trailed off for effect before continuing. "That's exactly what makes people skeptical." Keanu tilted his head slightly. "Skeptical?" Daniel's fingers tapped lightly against his armrest. "Nobody's perfect. And yet, you're treated as if you are. The internet loves you. People call you the last good guy in Hollywood. But isn't that just another Hollywood illusion? Another performance? A murmur rippled through the audience. This was the first real strike. The way Daniel framed it, it wasn't an attack. It was a question, one that planted doubt. It forced Keanu to respond without outright accusing him of anything. Keanu, however, didn't flinch. He simply offered a thoughtful nod before replying. Authenticity isn't something you prove. It's something you live. Daniel's smirk wavered slightly. Keanu continued, "The way people see me isn't in my control, but I've never tried to be perfect. I've only tried to be decent." The audience reacted positively, a light applause rippling through the studio. Daniel shifted, subtly tightening his grip on his notes. He wasn't going to let Keanu win the room so easily. Daniel smiled again, but this time, it was a measured smirk. "That's a nice sentiment, Keanu. But let's be honest. Hollywood is built on image. Whether you like it or not, you have one too. And that image, it comes with expectations." Keanu didn't respond immediately, letting Daniel continue. "People expect you to be the good guy. But isn't that exhausting? Never making a mistake? Always being the humble, selfless actor?" Keanu exhaled softly. "I think you're misunderstanding something." Daniel's smirk faltered. "Oh?" Keanu leaned forward slightly, his eyes steady. "Being kind isn't about meeting expectations. It's just about doing what feels right. If people respect that, great. If they don't, that's fine too." Daniel tried to cut in, but Keanu wasn't done. "But the moment you start doing good things, just to be seen as a good person, that's when it stops being real." The audience reacted instantly. A mix of nods and light applause spread through the room. Daniel felt it, the control of the narrative slipping, just slightly. He needed to push further. Daniel smiled again, but this time, there was a hint of sharpness behind it. "Okay, Keanu, let's talk about something specific." Keanu waited. "You're known for donating large amounts of money. Hospitals, education programs, charities. But some critics argue that charity isn't always the answer. That giving people money doesn't solve deeper systemic problems." Keanu's expression didn't change, but the room's energy shifted. Daniel pressed on. "Isn't it fair to say that your donations, while generous, are more of a temporary fix? A way to feel good, rather than actually change anything?" A slight murmur spread through the audience. It was a subtle attack, one that suggested Keanu's generosity wasn't as noble as it seemed. But Keanu, as always, didn't take the bait. He thought for a moment before answering. "Helping someone in need doesn't mean you've fixed the entire system, but it means you've helped someone." Daniel blinked, caught off guard by how simple, yet effective the response was. Keanu continued, "I don't donate to change the world overnight. I donate because someone, somewhere, needs help today." The audience broke into applause. Daniel quickly interjected before it could grow stronger. "But don't you think true empowerment is about teaching people to be self-sufficient, not just handing out money?" Keanu gave a small smile. "You assume those two things are separate." Daniel hesitated. Keanu leaned back slightly. "People think of help as a transaction, like giving takes something away. But real generosity doesn't work that way. It's not about control or power. It's about giving without expecting something back." The applause was louder this time. Even the audience could feel it now. Keanu wasn't falling into any of Daniel's traps. And Daniel knew it. Daniel glanced at the clock. They were running out of time, and Keanu had not stumbled once, which meant it was time for the hardest question of the night. Daniel's tone softened, becoming almost sympathetic. "Keanu, you've experienced more tragedy than most people ever will. Your father left when you were young. You lost your best friend, your daughter, your partner. You've been through pain that no one should have to endure." The audience fell silent. Mark, watching from backstage, tensed. Daniel continued, his voice laced with subtle manipulation. And yet, here you are, still giving, still helping. But tell me, does it ever feel fake? A heavy silence settled over the studio. Keanu's expression didn't waver. Daniel leaned in. Isn't it exhausting to pretend like you're okay all the time? The trap was set. The expectation was clear. Daniel wanted Keanu to crack, to admit weakness, to break the illusion of the unshakable good guy. But instead, Keanu smiled softly, not in amusement, but in understanding. And then he answered, simply and honestly, pain doesn't take away kindness. If anything, it makes it more necessary. The audience froze. Daniel, for the first time, didn't know what to say. Keanu's voice remained calm, but his words carried weight. Loss doesn't make you stop caring. It reminds you why you should. The entire room was silent. Then, a wave of applause erupted. Daniel sat back, speechless. He had tried to expose Keanu, to question his authenticity, to break him. But instead, Keanu had done what no guest before him had managed. He had taken every attack, every loaded question, every hidden insult, and turned them into moments of clarity. And Daniel? He had lost control of the entire interview. As the cameras zoomed in on his face, it became clear. Daniel Foster was no longer the one in charge. And Keanu Reeves? He had just begun. Daniel still has one last trick up his sleeve. But it might just be the move that ends his career forever. The Real Talk studio was heavy with tension. Daniel Foster sat across from Keanu Reeves, gripping his cue cards tighter than before. He had tried to crack Keanu, trap him, push him, unravel him. But every time he made a move, Keanu walked right through it, calm, steady, unshaken. Daniel was running out of options. He had one last play. And if it worked, Keanu's perfect image would finally crack. Daniel forced a smooth smile. Keanu, let's talk about your donations. Keanu waited. You give millions to hospitals, struggling families, and charities. That's well known. A pause. Then, Daniel leaned in slightly. But how much of that is really about helping? And how much is just about your image? A murmur swept through the audience. Daniel had just implied Keanu's kindness was performative, a PR stunt, a lie. The weight of the accusation hung in the air. Keanu took a slow breath. Then, he smiled. Not in amusement, but in understanding. And then, he asked, Daniel, when was the last time you helped someone? The audience inhaled sharply. Daniel froze. For the first time, he had no answer. He let out a nervous chuckle. That's not the question here. Keanu nodded. Exactly. The audience stirred. Keanu's voice remained steady, but firm. I don't publicize my donations. Other people do. But if kindness is visible and inspires more kindness, what's the harm in that? Daniel opened his mouth, but Keanu wasn't done. I don't donate to be seen. I donate because I can. And if that makes one more person feel like they should help too, that's a good thing. Applause erupted. Daniel's jaw clenched. He was losing them. He had one last card to play. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. All right, Keanu. Let's talk about politics. The audience tensed. Your donations align with certain social policies. Some would even call them a deliberate pause. Wealth redistribution. A bit socialist, wouldn't you say? The trap was set. If Keanu agreed, he'd alienate part of his audience. If he denied it, he'd look weak, like he needed to justify helping people. Daniel's smirk returned, but Keanu didn't flinch. Instead, he flipped the trap upside down. The idea that helping people is political is the problem. Silence. Then, in the same calm, effortless voice, he said, feeding someone who's hungry isn't socialism, it's kindness. Daniel's smirk vanished. Keanu leaned in slightly. Making sure a sick child gets medicine isn't a political statement. It's basic human decency. A single clap, Then another. Then, the entire studio erupted in applause. Daniel's fingers tightened around his cue cards. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Keanu had walked through every trap, every twist, every accusation, without a single misstep. And now, Daniel was the one exposed. The Real Talk studio felt different. The set was unchanged. The lights still bright. The cameras still rolling. The audience still watching. But Daniel Foster felt the shift. For years, he had mastered the art of trapping guests, pushing them into viral moments that would make headlines. But tonight, something was different. Because Keanu Reeves hadn't played the game. He didn't get defensive. He didn't stumble. He didn't dodge or deflect. Instead, he had done something far more dangerous. He had stayed completely in control, and Daniel knew it. Worse, the audience knew it too. Daniel forced a smile, though his mind was racing. This was his last chance. He needed to shift the conversation, take back control. He leaned forward, chuckling lightly. "Keanu, you've certainly given us some thoughtful answers tonight." Keanu, still perfectly composed, nodded. "Glad to hear that." Daniel pressed on, forcing the conversation to safer ground. "But let's step away from the serious stuff. You're one of the biggest stars in the world. What's next for Keanu Reeves?" A distraction. A chance to end the show with something light. Keanu smirked slightly. "Hopefully, a quiet dinner after this." The audience laughed, tension briefly easing. Even Daniel chuckled, though it was tight. Forced. Keanu continued, "I have some projects in the works, but to be honest, I'm just enjoying the present moment." Daniel nodded, but he knew it was over. Keanu wasn't giving him a viral soundbite. There was nothing left to push. And worst of all, Daniel knew it. Daniel glanced at the audience, searching for something. A reaction. A moment he could seize. Instead, what he saw was worse. Because they weren't looking at him anymore. They were looking at Keanu. Not just watching, rooting for him. He saw it in their faces. Respect. Admiration. Loyalty. This wasn't just an interview anymore. This was a reckoning. Daniel had tried to expose Keanu. Instead, he had exposed himself. A producer's voice crackled in Daniel's earpiece. "Daniel, we're wrapping in 60 seconds." Daniel swallowed. For the first time in his own studio, he felt small. He forced a final, gracious smile. "Well, Keanu, it's been a pleasure having you on the show." Keanu nodded, warm as ever. "Thanks, Daniel. Appreciate the conversation." Conversation. Not debate. Not interrogation. Just conversation. Daniel hated how effortless it sounded. The cameras rolled for the closing line. "That's all for tonight, folks. Thank you for watching." The applause was loud, but it wasn't for Daniel. It was for Keanu. And as Daniel shook his hand and stepped off stage, his mind was already racing. Because while the show was over, the fallout was just beginning. The interview was over. The Real Talk theme music played, credits rolled, and the stage lights dimmed. Applause lingered, but not for Daniel Foster. It was for Keanu Reeves. Daniel forced a smile, shaking Keanu's hand one last time. "Thanks again, Keanu. Always a pleasure." Keanu, ever gracious, nodded. "Take care, Daniel." Then, without hesitation, he walked off stage. And that was when Daniel felt it. Not just the awkward tension in the room, but the shift happening everywhere. Something was wrong. Daniel barely had time to process the disaster before a producer rushed over, holding up his phone. "Daniel, you need to see this." He took it, his stomach dropping as he saw the endless notifications. Trending #1 worldwide. Keanu destroys. Daniel Foster's social media was already tearing him apart. His reputation, the sharp, fearless interviewer who exposed Hollywood's elite, was crumbling in real time. And worse, he wasn't just being mocked. He was being torn apart. On Twitter, The narrative was brutal. Daniel Foster thought he was going to corner Keanu. Instead, he just embarrassed himself. Keanu didn't even have to fight back. He just let Daniel self-destruct. Daniel Foster: helping people is political. Keanu: no, it's just basic decency. Mic drop. The worst part? Even journalists were turning against him. Keanu went on with his life, unchanged. Because, in the end, one man had spent his career tearing people down. The other had spent his life lifting them up.